So welcome into Philadelphia Walks PTSD. Happy Easter. My name is Sharon Cole, or Sharon or Cole, or whatever you want to refer to me as. No big deal. In a good way. Don't care. I'm here on day 99 of my one video each day, 365-day campaign, raising money for a life lost, robbed, stolen, tortured, raped, mobbed, harassed, death threatened, and everything else, beginning the fourth Monday of January 2011, with a series of orchestrated events to make me believe I'd be murdered in my apartment. I actually believed I'd be murdered in my apartment. I was shaking and trembling so badly. I could barely hold the phone. I could not scream or make a sound. It took me I don't know, like a few minutes, a minute or two. I don't know how long it was before I finally called my sister. I called her first because I really didn't trust calling the police. I might have been afraid to call the police. We live in a liberal city, and it's almost like a no-no to trust the police, I guess. At least back in that era, you'd be considered a snitch if you called the police or talked to them or whatever. And she convinced me to finally call them. And I finally did. And when I was calling them, I actually believed for a second that maybe the call wasn't even going to their office or dispatch. I thought it was being rerouted by the CIA so that someone else would receive the call. That's how bad this was. I don't know anything about the CIA. I don't even care that much about the CIA. I was on a completely different track of, oh, I finally made a network of friends. I feel like I'm participating in life. I'm having a good time. Other than, wishing I could make more money, I was kind of trapped in dog walking. And I do believe I was led up to this event a certain way. So anyway, with that said, it was a really bad experience. In a way, there is a Jesus persecution idea, not a complex, but it's this thing where you're walking around and people are actually doing weird things where you feel persecuted, humiliated, mocked, stalked. It is bizarre. The problem is, normally a normal person can't go to, say, a psychologist or a psychiatrist or a therapist and try to explain everything. At least in my mind, if I were to try to explain everything, I would think, or I would wonder if they would just assume or try to diagnose something like paranoia. I knew that people were actually doing this, and there were a lot of them. So it could almost seem like the entire city, if you're in a specific neighborhood or what have you, and a lot of people are willing to do what's called community mobbing. The problem is, why do they do it? Don't know. And in fact, I would look up many terms over the course of many years. And in fact, I learned about the term gang stalking before this kicked off, because there were weird things happening here and there. And I was like, wow, what a coincidence that I ran into this person. And, I come out of my apartment, this person who I kind of knew as an acquaintance / friend comes around the corner and says, oh, I'm out. Imagine someone just said that without any context, nothing. And you're like, out of what? What do you mean? You're out of... That could later contribute to this idea of like a Truman Show being focused around you, a lot of cult members or gang members or group members, a lesbian mafia, whatever, trying to make it seem like they all know your business, or, oh, I know there's a show going, or I know you're being used for a show. Where, say, Hollywood actually gains their inspiration from regular people down here on the street who could never do anything about it and might not even recognize their own story for a Saturday Night Live skit. Anyway, all of that plays into like harming a person who basically really doesn't have the power to do anything at all, other than most of us have to make a living. The most power most of us have on this planet is trying to figure out how to make a living and keep a roof over our heads. That's pretty much the basics. If people gain power here and there and have control over communities or what have you, great, or more so, or whatever. But for the most part, a regular, seemingly powerless-ish person will be targeted, because such a person wouldn't be credible to someone who hears this notion of, oh, what do you think, the whole world's out to get you? You think the whole thing is centered around you? But see how they're playing into it? It's like, well, actually, Kind of, but I'm afraid to say it because I know I'm not that important in the scheme of things. Turns out targets are important in order for these people to be able to play out their games. So they need someone who isn't credible, or not credible is not the best word. They need someone who's average or regular or normal-ish. Technically, I would be considered slightly above average just because I have a college degree, and that puts people in a different category. Now I have a master's degree, which I was forced to get because I ran towards that in hopes of escaping whatever it was. So anyway, the people who play these games, they know that someone like me wouldn't be able to like contact the media or have power or influence over people who could make a change. Do you see what I mean? It would, at most, average people would say, well, clearly the whole world's not against you, so maybe you think maybe you have a problem. How awful is that if you are actually being attacked? If you are actually experiencing people who say even pretended to be somewhat friendly with you or very friendly with you, even romantic with you, and then they turn. Just like that, as soon as the games kick off, then they become, oh, well, it's your perception, it's not reality. But that person would actually have changed just like that. So it is a reality. It is not my perception. And there's lots of information about gang stalking, orchestrated harassment, the Jesus complex, or the Jesus persecution experience, if you will. Even weather can play into it. We had blizzards that year in 2011, more snow and blizzards ever since 1941 in Philadelphia. So what was 1941? Pearl Harbor. It was an all-out war, an all-out attack. And these people are very sick, sick, sick people. They have a very serious problem. Now, maybe it was to expose what I call people of the lie. This is a book that was written by, I forget the guy's name. I want to say Peck or something like that. But people of the lie kind of, I didn't know about this book until I heard about it from someone else quite a few years ago. And as soon as I read the first line of the book, immediately I was like, yes, I get that. I get it. I don't really understand why people are doing this, that, or the other. So maybe they're being exposed. Let's see. People of the Lie. I'll look it up. Scott Peck. Right. A book by Scott Peck. He does take a Christian angle or perspective, if you will. He says in there that he doesn't preach, but he's coming from his experience having grown up or being indoctrinated in a Christian belief system, background, and so forth and so on. So he was speaking from what he knows as his, upbringing and programming as a person. So I do wonder, for all the people who unleashed this thing upon me, and I wonder if they have a conscience, if they care at all, or if they really wanted to kick someone to the curb who was actually trying to get a leg up and actually trying to get away from the trappings of a state that keeps people so oppressed. It is disturbing. Delaware. Please help me escape, because no one knows how to advance unless you steal money from other people. So I escaped to Philadelphia, but it seems Philadelphia is part of the satanic network. According to some people, it might be a complex of politics, this whole tri-state mid-Atlantic region. So on this holy day, and I didn't even grow up that religious, I was innately probably Christian in nature, if you will, not to just belief system-wise, celebrated Christmas, Easter, so forth and so on, and follow those tenets, if you will. But do these people have a conscience? What makes them want to do this or play this game at that level? And then, in some ways, it's this thing like maybe I'm supposed to be grateful because it was like a reprogramming thing by the CIA, and I wound up while being tortured on the streets. And we are talking prisoner of war level. I don't say that lightly. This is a new form of prisoner. I have had things happen to my body, and it's like, what am I? So it'll just wear off. This, I've had totally weird things happen, And it's like my brain is in just sort of a stunned state of I just have to keep going, I guess. But trying to get back to my point here. But these people, am I supposed to be grateful because I became, while being tortured, a yogi? I started practicing yoga. There was a lot of yoga available at community rates, donation based, low cost, and normal yoga, 75 to 90 minutes. These days, you can't find anything like that. It doesn't exist except for Ashtanga, which is on the side. It will always be the same. It is a very traditional, sacred practice. It is about mind, body, and spirit. The vinyasa or power classes, it is that bad in Philadelphia. People are paying 10 times more for 10 times less. But I was able to learn and practice a very good, tried and true and golden sequence of vinyasa flow, which is similar. It's, branches right off of Ashtanga. So I was able to do that and become good enough to actually be able to teach it. I wound up a raw vegan foodie green juicer. That's very hard to do, to change a diet that much. I wound up getting my MFA and wild dog walking, and then writing 4 books, 2 collections of essays, one tribute to my mom as someone who had to suffer the job of a sample lady because she moved to Florida and had to find a job until she could technically retire and live off of Social Security. She was a secretary before that. And also a big book, Duplicity and Dress, Not Factories in the Making, by Erin Vans. I used a different name, and I changed all names and everything in the book, except for in the earlier drafts. When I was initially writing it, I wrote it, with everybody's names and then changed everything for publishing. And then I also published an essay that I'd written a long time ago called Milk and Pea Oppression. So technically there are 5 pieces of works out there published by bookbaby.com. I put all the effort into it. They didn't really do that much. They just format it electronically. You pay for them to format it for an ebook, and then it automatically gets distributed to others. But the writer has to do everything. They just format it. That's about it. Then I have to proof it again to make sure it's not totally messed up, because when they format it, it could force pages into other pages and stuff like that. So I'm having to do all of this while dog walking and earning a meager income. So am I supposed to be grateful? Because in a way, I accomplished all these things, but I was being tortured so badly out here and experiencing people so horrific in terms of either on the street and their behavior. It is disturbing. I don't know if they're on too many prescriptions. I don't know what it is. I'm thinking of one person in general, Heather, and I'm like, she actually became a therapist, and that is scary, disturbing. And people don't change. That I am here to tell you, if your basic nature is evil and malintent, it doesn't change. She will always be the same, this person, and she is now claiming to be a therapist. That is very disturbing to me. It is disturbing that I've met a lot of therapists and licensed social workers, and they do the opposite of what one would expect. Basic validation and support. And this is out here in just meeting acquaintances. I was lucky enough, although I had to pay for it. It was sliding scale, nonprofit, feminine-based therapy. I was lucky enough to find people who were highly intelligent at Women's Therapy Center, which no longer exists, because as the times changed, and before I would just right about the time when I would leave, they were taking surveys to see if everyone was okay for this to be a trans-inclusive therapy office. So there would be people with different plumbing, if you will, coming in who identified as female, who could then seek therapy at the same place, as opposed to it being strictly a feminine-born or female-born, like physically female-born location. And everybody's so nice, and we're all part of the LGBT community, so it's like, yeah, that's okay. In retrospect, I think, well, technically, if there are women who need to be who don't need any maleness around them in order to feel empowered and not oppressed, then they kind of don't want someone coming in, even if if that person feels like they were born a woman and all this stuff, if they still have the plumbing, they still have the body, they still have the energy of a male, then these women would not be happy. But anyway, that's a whole other point. In this case, we have, am I supposed to be grateful? I was at one point, whatever it was, someone had me identifying every license plate on the street, every make and model of every car. I know which states were represented here in Philadelphia, car wise and license plate wise, before I left and had to move to Florida for 2.5 years. I come back and we have different license plates here. They restocked the city. They churned it over, got rid of a bunch of people, and put in a lot of Texas and Florida. And I was just in Florida. So I'm kind of curious where all the Floridians came from and why they're here. Texas was always kind of represented anyway, and some people think that this seemingly experiment was NASA inspired. And technically, my case, and I'm so not kidding, would be worth $50 million because of how bad this was. It doesn't seem like it because I seem healthy and so forth and so on. That whatever happened was so what there must have been one or two angel hands who kept me going, in addition to me already being maybe in a way sort of, what's the word, conditioned to put up with a lot. I grew up very quiet, independent. I didn't rely on a lot of friends. I was sort of a loner, if you were. Kind of didn't feel like I fit in all the time in, whatever schools I went to or whatever my surroundings. Came up here, found somewhat of a home in the LGBT community. And I will say this, the torture is so bad, emotionally, physically, and otherwise, that anyone who is used to being a little normally social, in a normal social way, who's conditioned to rely on friends, if they are attacked, they would commit suicide. I'm so not kidding. There are kids who committed suicide, and I wondered if they were actually gang stalked. There was a kid in Texas, and I wondered if he was actually gang stalked. For some reason, it really rang true as something's wrong here because it doesn't match up. Now, I know the media doesn't show everything, but I wonder about people who are technically being gang stalked, and they may not realize it. And you can't express everything that goes on because it can seem supernatural at times. You can go to the bathroom for 3 months and there will be an emergency responder screaming down your street with a siren on. And at some point you're like, I don't even want to go to the bathroom because I'm afraid an ambulance or a cop car or a fire engine will come down my street. That's just one of 72,000 layers of forms of harassment that were unleashed in my case. I want to know if these people have a conscience. The ones who willingly participated at a heavily concentrated level. I want to know if some of the people in the past who were my dog walking clients realized that they were actually part of a human trafficking situation. I couldn't figure out how to get out. I did actually apply an interview at a couple places as best I could, considering I had PTSD at the wazoo. We were talking, I am so not kidding how bad this was. And then try to call my mom and dad. And of course, they come from certain backgrounds and levels of education, and they didn't know what to do. Everyone's kind of limited as to what are you supposed to do? And they couldn't understand it on a deeper level because, of course, they weren't experiencing it. And everybody has their own constraints, restraints, limitations. My mom, at that point, was living with my aunt. So it's this weird thing of, it's not like she could just say, come and stay with me. And then my dad, of course, had been married to another woman for many years. And it was sort of I loved my dad, and it was sort of an interesting situation growing up. And in addition, he might have sort of offered, but it's this awkward thing of, I'm not sure which, it kind of was a thing of I have all these dog walks here. If I were to go there, then what? Try to find a job. And it's hard to explain. I would feel actually blocked, if you will. I couldn't think normally in certain people's presence, which is why I try to maintain a relationship with my dad and less so with my step family. Because for some reason I couldn't function in their presence. I don't know what that is. I do know that it's better to walk away from energies or people who, for some reason, create an obstruction to your brain and your brain can't even function. So it's better to find a place where at least your brain can function. So, anyway, point being, do these people who willingly, consciously, knowingly participated, do they have a conscience? And when will they pay the price for their actions? It's a huge risk to do something like this and not expect a backlash or to be held accountable. And one last thing I can try to consider what caused this. Like, I even was like, did I do something? Like, what did I do to deserve this? And I did wonder about an op-ed that was published. I wrote it back in like 2003 or 4 or something like this, about Donald Trump and him publicly spanking and humiliating Tara O'Connor, or whatever her name was. She was a beauty pageant queen, Miss USA or whatever, and he dethroned her, took her crown away and everything because she broke one of the rules, partying or what have you. So I wrote an op-ed, having a reaction to how awful this was, of this woman being paraded out in front of everyone and publicly spanked. And it was published in the Philly Daily News, and I wondered if that kind of kicked off an issue. Or if it was other things. I had all kinds of odd jobs. I was a writer on staff at one point. Then I went freelance. Then I did odd jobs to keep myself supported. This is considered kind of normal-ish, particularly in cities. And I wondered if working for places where there might have been a lot of drug running, say, like at Whole Foods back in the day. I even worked for a dog walking outfit, Philip Pets, back in the day. And I wondered if the Drug Enforcement Agency was even involved at some point of creating some sort of circus show. I don't know what to say. Just because drugs are such a huge issue in general in the United States, it's a very serious problem, and war, if you will. So anyway, that's it. I'll wrap it up. It's day 99 here on Easter, April 9th, 2023. We just had a shooting down the street at a really nice SEPTA station, one of the nicest ones where no one would really expect that to happen. And then also where I grew up at a mall in Delaware. And that's a biggie. They usually don't get that kind of action down there. So thank you so much and have a great day.